My daughter was 11 years old when she started keeping a notebook. I didn't know that at the time. I found out much later, the way I found out about most things in my marriage, which is to say, too late and all at once. Her name is Zoey. She's 16 now, and she has her mother's eyes, my stubbornness. And I will be grateful for that stubbornness every single day for the rest of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to go back to the summer I turned 42. That was the year my father-in-law, a man I genuinely respected for nearly 2 decades, looked me in the eye at a 4th of July barbecue and told me I was doing well for myself. The way he said it, that pause before "for yourself," I heard what he meant. I'd heard it 100 times, in 100 different ways, since I married into that family. My wife's name was Adeline. We met when I was 26 and she was 24, and I thought she was the most alive person I'd ever encountered. She laughed at everything. She had opinions about everything. She had opinions about everything. She made even a Tuesday night feel like something worth showing up for. Her family was a different matter. Her mother, I'll call her what I always called her, which was nothing good in my head, and ma'am to her face, had decided within the first 6 months of knowing me that I was acceptable but not exceptional. Her older brother thought I was soft. Her younger sister, a woman who had spent 15 years being romantically disappointed and blamed everyone but herself for it, had made something of a project out of convincing Adeline that she'd settled. I owned a small logistics company. Nothing glamorous. We moved freight for mid-sized manufacturers across 3 states. I'd built it from a single leased truck and a spreadsheet on a laptop I bought used. By the time Zoe was born, we had 22 drivers and a real office with a receptionist named Dolores, who kept a bowl of hard candy on her desk and remembered everyone's birthday. It was mine. Every square inch of it, bought with years I couldn't get back. Adeline's family had wanted her to marry someone with a title, a doctor, a partner at a law firm, someone whose job could be explained at dinner parties in one word. Logistics required a follow-up sentence, and follow-up sentences bored them. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that what mattered was what Adeline and I had built together, and we had built something real, a home, mine, technically, inherited from my grandfather. A 3-bedroom craftsman on a corner lot that he paid off in 1987 and left to me in a will that was as clear as anything I'd ever read. We had Zoe. We had 12 years of Christmases and minor arguments about the thermostat and a shared history that I thought meant something. I was wrong about that last part. I want to be honest about the early signs, because I think I owe that to anyone listening. There were signs. Adeline started working late sometime around Zoe's 9th birthday. It was gradual at first, 1 or 2 nights a week, and she had a reasonable explanation every time. Her firm was preparing for a major audit. A client was difficult. Her team was understaffed. These were all plausible things, and I believed them, because I wanted to believe them, and because I was busy, and because I am, apparently, a man who will accept a plausible story over an implausible truth for longer than I should. The distance was harder to explain away. We stopped talking the way we used to talk. The conversations we had became logistical. Who was picking Zoe up, whether we needed more coffee, what time the plumber was coming. We were 2 people managing a household, which is not the same thing as 2 people choosing each other. I brought it up once, directly. We were sitting in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, and I said, "I feel like we're disappearing from each other." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't read, and then she said, "I think you're overthinking it." She poured herself more coffee and took it into the other room. I let it go. I shouldn't have. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that Zoe was watching all of it with the focused, unblinking attention that children reserve for the things adults pretend aren't happening. She had started the notebook, she told me later, because she wanted to remember. She wasn't sure what she was going to do with what she was writing down. She was 11. She just knew that something felt wrong, and she'd inherited enough of my stubbornness to refuse to pretend otherwise. She wrote down dates and times. She wrote down what her mother said and what her mother's expressions looked like when she said it. She wrote down when her mother came home and when she didn't. She wrote down a name she'd heard through a half-closed door, a name that wasn't mine, spoken in a voice her mother used for things she thought were private. She was 11 years old, and she was building a case, and she didn't tell me because she loved me, and she was afraid of what telling me would break. She kept the notebook for 3 years. My father-in-law's name is Bernard, and of all of Adeline's family, he was the one I trusted most. He was a retired civil engineer, precise and unsentimental, a man who measured twice and cut once. He'd helped me refinish the back porch the summer after Zoe was born. We'd watched football together for years. I'd believed, maybe naively, that he saw me. So when Bernard called me on a Thursday evening in late February and said he needed to talk to me about something, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was family business, his health, maybe, or a legal matter involving the estate. He asked if we could meet in person. I said of course. We met at a diner near his house on Saturday morning. He ordered black coffee and looked at his hands for a long moment before he spoke. "I want you to know," he said, "that I never approved of it." I put my cup down. "Of what?" he told me. He didn't give me details. He said he didn't know the details, which I later came to believe was partially true. But what he knew was enough. He knew Adeline had been involved with someone else. He knew it had been going on for some time. He knew because her mother knew, and her mother had told him. And he had spent several months trying to convince himself it wasn't his place to say anything. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. He looked at me, and his jaw moved the way jaws move when a man is carrying more shame than he has room for. "Because they're planning something," he said. "For Easter. Her mother is planning to bring him to Easter dinner." I sat with that for a moment. Easter dinner. At my house. At the house my grandfather had built, that I'd inherited, that had my name on the deed and had for 20 years. She was going to bring him to my house, I said. Yes. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for 45 minutes. Then I went inside and I started making phone calls. The first call was to my attorney. His name is Kwame, and he is precisely the kind of man you want in your corner when the floor falls out. Calm, fast, thorough. I told him what Bernard had told me. He told me to document everything and not to move out of the house under any circumstances. "The house is yours," he said. "It was yours before the marriage. You have the deed, you have the inheritance documentation, and if I remember correctly, we addressed the property clearly in your prenuptial agreement." We had. Adeline had signed a prenuptial agreement before we were married. Her family hadn't loved it, but Adeline had agreed that protecting an inherited property was reasonable. The agreement was specific. The house remained mine in the event of divorce, along with the business and any assets directly tied to it. Adeline was entitled to an equitable share of marital assets accumulated during the marriage. Savings, joint investments, but not the house, and not the company. "Don't panic," Kwame said. "And not the company. And don't tip your hand." I didn't. I spent the next 6 weeks behaving as normally as I could. I went to work. I came home. I helped Zoe with homework and made dinner twice a week and did not look at my wife like a man who knew what he knew. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Easter was on a Sunday that year, mid-April, one of those clear, cold mornings where the light looks like it was rinsed overnight and the whole world smells like cut grass and mud. I'd been up since 5. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and thought about my grandfather, who had built this house with a friend of his, and a borrowed level, who had raised 3 kids in it, who had handed me the key the year before he died and said, "Take care of it." I intended to. Adeline's family arrived at 1. Her mother first, in a new coat, followed by her younger sister, and then Bernard, who caught my eye for a fraction of a second before he looked away. And then, behind them, a man I'd never seen before. He was about my age. Well-dressed, he walked through my front door with the easy confidence of someone who had been told he was welcome here. Adeline was in the kitchen. She came out when she heard the door, and there was a moment, a half-second, where I watched her face do something complicated. Then she composed it, and she said, with the particular brightness she used when she was performing, "Everyone's here, good." I stood at the entrance to the living room. Her mother made the introductions with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had rehearsed this and decided the best approach was speed. "This is a friend of Adeline's," she said. "He'll be joining us today." She said his name. I didn't write it down, and I'm not going to share it here, because he's not the point of the story. He was just a man standing in my living room with my wife's family, around him like a frame around a picture they'd already decided to hang. He looked at me. I looked at him. I said, "Nice to meet you." Adeline's mother smiled the smile of a woman who believes she has won something. We sat down for dinner. I had cooked roast chicken, not lamb, because Zoe didn't eat lamb and because it was my house and I'd decided what we were having. The table was set. Everything looked normal. From the outside, this was just a family having Easter dinner. Adeline's mother had seated the man next to her daughter. Across from me, I noticed she had not asked where I wanted people to sit. She had just done it. I passed the potatoes. I refilled glasses. I listened to conversations I wasn't part of, stories about people I didn't know, references to plans that hadn't included me. The man was charming in the practiced way of someone who charms people for a living. He made her mother laugh twice. Her sister warmed up to him by the second course. I looked at Zoey. She was 14 at this point, and she was sitting very still with the particular stillness of someone who was paying extremely close attention. She met my eyes for a moment. Something moved across her face that I didn't have a name for. It was her mother-in-law, Adeline's mother, who finally pushed the thing into the open. She did it in the way of people who have decided their cruelty is actually honesty, which is to say, casually, mid-conversation, as if she were commenting on the weather. "It's nice that we can all be together like this," she said. "Adeline deserves to be happy." She looked at me when she said it. Not at Adeline. At me. I set my fork down. I looked at Adeline. At me. I set my fork down. I looked at Adeline, who was looking at her plate. I looked at her mother, who had the expression of someone who expected me to leave the room. "I agree completely," I said. "She does deserve to be happy." Her mother blinked. "I've always thought so," I continued. "She also deserves honesty, transparency, the kind of respect that doesn't involve bringing someone into a home that isn't yours to bring him to." The table went quiet. "I'm glad you're all comfortable," I said. "I want to make sure everyone's clear on something so there's no confusion later. This house belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandfather before I was married. That's documented clearly and specifically in our prenuptial agreement, which Adeline signed 15 years ago." I turned to my wife. "You're welcome to share that detail with anyone you've made other plans with." Adeline's sister's mouth opened. The man across from me had gone very still. Adeline's mother looked at me with an expression that had started as triumph and was becoming something else. "The business," I said, "is also mine. Started before the marriage, structured appropriately, documented thoroughly. Kwame, my attorney, is very good at his job. I'd recommend that anyone with questions about the specifics consult their own." I picked my fork back up. "The chicken's good," I said. "Zoey, would you like more?" Zoey looked at me across the table, and she said, clearly without hesitation, "Yes, please." And then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached into the pocket of the cardigan she was wearing, and she set a small, spiral-bound notebook on the table next to her plate. She didn't open it. She just set it there. Her grandmother looked at it. Her mother looked at it. The man across the table looked at it. The man across the table looked at it. "I've been keeping notes," Zoey said, in the even, steady voice of someone much older than 14. "For a while now. Dates, times, things I heard. I didn't want to forget." Adeline said, very quietly, "Zoey, I'm not going to do anything with it right now." Zoey said, "I just want everyone to know it exists." She put it back in her pocket. Her grandmother's face had gone white. Her mother was looking at the tablecloth. The man across from me had apparently decided to study the window. Bernard, at the far end of the table, looked at his plate. I thought I saw something on his face that might have been the complicated relief of a man who had finally done the right thing. Imperfectly, too late, but done it. I finished my dinner. The conversation at the table never really recovered, and I wasn't sorry about that. Adeline's mother tried twice to restart something. A comment about the weather, a remark about a cousin's new baby. But the room had changed in the way rooms change when something true has been said in them. Her sister ate in silence. The man left before dessert. He shook my hand at the door, briefly, and didn't say much, and I didn't either. Bernard was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway for a moment with his coat on and looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said, "for longer than today." "I know," I said. I shook his hand. "I don't know what happens with Bernard and me from here. That's still being worked out. But I think of the two people in that family I might eventually find my way back to something with. He's one of them." Adeline moved out 6 weeks later. She didn't fight the house. Kwame had been right. The documentation was airtight, and Adeline, whatever else she had become, was not stupid. She got her share of the joint accounts, which was fair, and we worked out a custody arrangement for Zoey with less ugliness than I'd feared. Zoey chose to stay with me primarily. She said she wanted to stay in her room, in her house, at her school. I didn't argue with that the night Adeline left. A Tuesday, with her sister's car in the driveway and 2 trips back and forth. Zoey and I ordered pizza and watched a movie. I don't remember because neither of us was really watching it. At some point during the second half, she leaned over and put her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was small. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, The notebook. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. I started it when I was 11. Why didn't you tell me? She was quiet for a moment. Because I kept hoping I was wrong, she said. And then I wasn't wrong, and I didn't know how to say it without breaking something. I thought about that. I'm sorry you carried that by yourself, I said. I'm sorry you had to find out at Easter, she said. We both almost laughed at that. The almost laugh felt important. It's been 2 years now. The company is doing well. Better than well, actually. We brought on a regional partner last year and expanded into 2 new states. Dolores still has the hard candy. I promoted a guy named Terry, not the one from the list, a different Terry, my dispatcher, to operations manager, and he's good at it. I live in my grandfather's house. I repainted the back porch last spring. Zoey helped, which mostly meant she sat on the steps and offered opinions about the color and ate an entire sleeve of crackers while I worked. But I was glad for the company. She's 16 now, and she has opinions about everything. And she makes even a Tuesday feel like something worth showing up for. I notice I just used the same words for her that I once used for her mother. I've thought about that. I think what it means is that the quality I loved was real. It was just in the wrong person. Or it was in the right person, and she lost it somewhere. I'm not sure. I try not to spend too much time in that particular room of the past. What I know is this: the house is mine. The business is mine. My kid trusts me. And every morning I make coffee and stand at the kitchen window and look at the corner lot and think about a man who built something with borrowed tools and called it home and left it to me, and I think about what I'm going to leave to Zoey someday. I intend to leave her something worth having. I intend for her to know she comes from someone who, when it counted, didn't flinch. That's the part I'm still working on, the not flinching. But I think I'm getting there. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that house over those years. Not the affair. That's almost the least interesting part of it, looking back. What I keep coming back to is the accumulation, the slow, steady build of 1,000 small disrespects, each one minor enough to dismiss, until they weren't minor at all. They were a pattern. And patterns, if you're honest with yourself, tell you everything. I wasn't honest with myself for a long time. I wanted the story I'd chosen to be true. I think that's human. I think most people, when they've invested years of themselves into something, will accept a lot of implausible explanations before they'll accept the one that requires them to start over. That's not stupidity. It's the cost of caring. But there's a point where loyalty to a story becomes a kind of cowardice, and I crossed that line more than once and kept walking. What I didn't expect was Zoey. A child shouldn't have to be the one who sees clearly when the adults around her have decided not to. She was 11 years old, and she was writing down dates and names in a spiral notebook because the grown-ups in her life had made the world feel untrustworthy, and she refused to let that feeling go unnamed. That's not something I taught her. I like to think some of it is just who she is, stubborn in the best sense, unwilling to pretend. But part of me wonders if she was also watching me all those years and deciding she wasn't going to make the same choice I kept making. Kids do that. They learn from what we do more than what we say. And what I was doing for a long time was absorbing disrespect quietly and calling it patience. What I know now is that there's a difference between patience and erasure. Patience is choosing not to react to something because the moment isn't right. Erasure is convincing yourself the thing didn't happen because acknowledging it cost too much. I was doing the second thing and calling it the first. The house thing, the prenup, the documentation, all of it. People sometimes ask if I was cold about it, if I planned it like some kind of trap. I didn't. Kwame had helped me structure things clearly years earlier, because that's what you do when you inherit something that mattered to someone you loved. I protected it. What I did at that Easter table wasn't a trap. It was just the truth, spoken out loud in a room where everyone had counted on me staying quiet. I think that's the part worth holding on to. Not the revenge angle, not the legal win. Just a moment of deciding that the truth was allowed to be in the room. Adeline made her choices. Her mother made hers. The consequences that followed weren't punishment from some outside force. They were just the natural end of a long chain of decisions, each one leading to the next. You spend years treating someone like a placeholder. You build plans that depend on their silence. You bring a stranger into their home and expect them to look away. And at some point, the math stops working in your favor. That's not fate. That's just arithmetic. Zoey has the notebook still. She told me she might keep it forever, or she might burn it someday. She hasn't decided. I told her either choice was fine by me. What I know is that she's 16 and she trusts me, And we painted the back porch together last spring. And some Tuesday evenings we eat pizza and watch something neither of us is really watching. And that is enough. That is, actually, more than enough. It turns out that what I thought I was losing was never the thing I was most afraid of losing. The house is still standing. So are we.